Welcome back. All right, I want to talk about the Edmonton Oilers today. I want to talk about the Edmonton Oilers, a team that's still in a playoff spot right now. They, of course, are in a wild card spot, and there's a lot of debate about the team. There's an article from Mark Spector yesterday that caught my eye. Apparently caught the eye of some people as well. And I think there's the wording in here, so I'll just go through a little snippet. Just paraphrasing a bit, too, about how he's saying that Ken Holland's jobs get, that there's more and more pressure on Ken Holland. And hockey fans have echo chambers that strengthen a belief, and that's true, but that's not just true of hockey fans. That's just in general right now, just everywhere. So he's saying basically along the lines of, and then throws in the analytical sites. So Natural Stat Trick, Money Puck. I've used Money Puck in videos before, right? Natural Stat Trick I've looked through. I know Natural Stat Trick. A lot of their various tables are used online, and sometimes those are attributed to JFresh. JFresh is something completely different, not mentioned in the article, but the idea is this. We as fans don't know what we think we know. And that's what I took from the article from Mark Spector, that yes, fans have this idea that there's this easy to fix and that Ken Holland should be held to task for whatever is wrong with the Oilers right now. Now, Ken Holland was hired May 7th of 2019. I think that with a general manager, you need to give him about 2 years, and then you got a good idea of the direction the GM thinks the team's going in and how the GM plans to spend money, handle assets, and all that stuff, right? I think that before that, you might be looking at a GM that inherited some bad contracts, inherited a really bad situation, and you got to give them a couple of years to at least start digging their way out. Basically, you should have an idea of where they're headed. Now, one thing that was said by Ken Holland that I kind of thought, well, at least I'm pretty sure it was Ken Holland that said they were a Final Four team last spring. Yes, the Oilers made it to the conference finals last spring. It is not last spring currently. And this is a problem. And I've seen fans do this too, right? And I've seen, and I think this is pretty standard. Last spring, my team did this, therefore, they're still just as good as they were then. And there's some truth to that on some level, sure, but I talked about it during the summer too, that the East was going to tighten up a lot because there's no way we were going to see that huge gap between the top 8 and the bottom 8. And there were those who said, no, look at how much of a gap there is. Those 8 teams that made the playoffs should make the playoffs again next year. But every year's something new. So you can't make the assumption that just because the Edmonton Oilers made it to the Final Four last year, that they're a team that's necessarily a contender this season. And that's part of the trick, and that's something that a general manager should be ahead of. General managers should have the analytics team. The Rangers have their own. We know that from recent discussions about Gerard Gallant. They have their own, and their stats people say things are fine. The funny thing is the Rangers then rattled off a 7-game winning streak, so maybe there's something to that. I do think that there are times that fans can get really kind of cocky about whether or not they know more than a general manager or a coach. And I've never done that on this channel, and I've never felt that way. I've had some head-scratching moments, especially as a Canuck fan over the final 2 years that Benning was in Vancouver. A lot of head-scratching moments that then sometimes get attributed to Francesco Aquilini or wherever. But in Edmonton, all of the blame seems to be going on Ken Holland. So let's not even get into the advanced stats, the expected goals for. You can check those out on Natural Stat Trick or Money Puck, which gets free advertising from Mark Spector in his article. So comparing year to year, because again, if we're going to talk about how they were a Final Four team last year, well, what were they like at this point last year? This point last year, they were 18-13-2. This year, they're 17-14-2. So it's a 1-game difference. It's not a big difference this year from where they were last year. Does not necessarily mean they're as good as they were last year, where they got on these big runs and they had 5-game winning streak, 5-game winning streak, 4-game winning streak, all this going on. October of last year, they were 6-1. This year, they were 6-3. November last year, they were 9-4. This year, they were 7-7. And in December last year, they were 3-7-1. This year, they're 4-4-2. And I don't think that the Oilers are in panic territory yet. I don't. That being said, when I do a panic index later today, my opinion on it, may be one thing, but the opinion of the fan base seems to be something else. And there's definitely some sense of panic, and I get why. You've got Connor McDavid, you've got Leon Draisaitl. You don't know for how long. It'd be great to hear that McDavid and Draisaitl are going to spend their whole careers in Edmonton, and you can talk about how much money they make and how the cap's all managed, and we'll talk about that a bit. But I get it. You know, that feeling of we have to have a Stanley Cup championship in Edmonton to keep McDavid and Draisaitl. That may be one part of the argument, or we have to win one before they potentially leave, right? It's kind of the same idea. Now, in 33 games this year, McDavid has 28 goals, 36 assists, 64 points. Last year, in 80 games, he had 44 goals, 79 assists, 123 points. His scoring slowed down, so even though he's got a much better points per game right now than what he ended up with last year he had an excellent points per game at this stage of the season as well. McDavid is very consistent. I still believe the best player in the game. The argument could be made for Sid. I know the argument could be made for Sid. Personally, for me, I'm going with McDavid. Draisaitl's number 2 on the scoring again. 33 games, 21 goals, 33 assists, 54 points. Last year he had 55 goals, 55 assists for 110 points in 80 games. The goal scoring is still perfectly fine. The points are perfectly fine. He's on pace to score more than he did last year. So you're not finding the problem there. Now the question, of course, of their defensive abilities comes up every now and then, but they're not paying them that money for the defense. They're paying them that money for the offense. You need to have other players around them that can play the defensive game and cover things up. Not that I think McDavid's bad defensively, because I don't think he's bad without the puck, but he's not Bergeron, right? Because only Bergeron's Bergeron. Zach Hyman, 32 games so far this year, 14 goals, 20 assists, 34 points. Last year, 76 games, 27 goals, 27 assists, 54 points. Hyman's honestly playing better. And I skipped over Nugent Hopkins. I won't skip over him again. 33 games, 17 goals, 21 assists, 38 points for Nugent Hopkins. Last year in 63 games, he only had 11 goals, 39 assists, 50 points. He's only 12 points away from equaling last year's totals, and he's already got more goals. Nugent Hopkins has been fantastic. The depth behind them has been a problem. So you have 28, 21, 17, and 14. And then beyond that, the next goal... or the next level of goals, you got a couple of guys with 5, including Evander Kane, who is nowhere near a return. So when you look at last year's numbers, Hyman ended up with 27 goals. He should be able to best that this year. McDavid has 28 goals. He only had 44 last year. He could double that this year, right? 56 is not something that I think is outside the realm of possibility. Draisaitl could best his 55 goals from last year. But then you get into the rest. You get into Tyson Barrie, 4 goals, 22 assists, 26 points in 33 games. His offense is honestly pretty good. Last year, he had 41 points, 7 goals, 34 assists to get there in 73 games. He is likely to top his points total too. But then you get into the defensive side of it, right, with that blue line and how it just looks like things are a disaster, that things break down defensively. And then there's arguments about the goaltending as well, although Stuart Skinner's recent play, I think, has calmed a lot of that down. And then maybe the most talked about is Darnell Nurse. Now, this is where Ken Holland can absolutely be held to task. Nurse makes $9.25 million and has a no-movement clause. They can't trade him. So for anybody who says, well, maybe they should get rid of Nurse, you can't. Nurse can just say, I'm not going anywhere, and that's it. Now, one thing that I've said about no movement clauses is I don't mind a no movement clause. Doesn't bother me. For a player to say, I want the right to refuse a trade, good. I think that's fine. If the GM agrees with him, great. But you're supposed to get a discount, too, with that. Normally, with the no movement clause, in exchange for giving them that security, you're paying them a little bit less than market value. Nurse at $9.25 million, we can have that argument about market value and whether or not they're getting their money back on their investment. 33 games, 5 goals, 18 assists, or 5 goals, 13 assists for 18 points. Last year in 71 games, he had 9 goals, 26 assists, 35 points. He's on pace to better his points total from last year, too. I like Nurse. I think Nurse is a good defenseman. I think he's still got a lot of upside to his game as well. Has he struggled this year? Absolutely. I talk about goaltenders and how we aren't very forgiving of goaltenders when they allow a bad goal. There's no forgiveness for a defenseman either when they cough up the puck at the other team's blue line. And it is an issue. And with Nurse, we've seen that this year, where a lot of the turnovers that end up in the back of their net You can trace them back to various members of that defense, including Nurse, but it's really going to stand out when it's Nurse because of the cap hit, because of the no movement clause, because it's a long-term contract. It's going to make that spotlight shine brighter. I would also say in Nurse's defense, he plays a ton of minutes, so the odds of him making a mistake to me go up. If you have 12 minutes in a game, as opposed to 18, the odds of you playing error-free for 12 minutes are higher than playing error-free for 18 minutes. That's why I don't pile on defensemen so much when they're having a couple of bad issues with turnovers here and there. Which I know there will be people who watch this and say, hey, it's more than here and there. I understand. I'm just saying that for me, I think Nurse, the contract, is it problematic? Probably, yes. But your GMs are in a tough spot. Because if you don't keep the player, you're labeled as cheap. If you don't keep the player and the team kind of falls apart without that player, you can't replace him. Then you end up being labeled as a bad GM. That player could go somewhere else and really take off. I do think that there's not necessarily fear, but I think they want to avoid any situation where it could come back to haunt them and bite them in the end, right? Then you have Evander Kane, 14 games played because of his horrific injury. 5 goals, 8 assists, 13 points. They miss Kane. And not having Evander Kane on the wing makes a huge difference. Last year in 43 games after they acquired him, 22 goals, 17 assists, 39 points. And so for Evander Kane, as long as he's out, they're going to have problem with scoring on the wings. And it's not as easy for Holland to go out and get players because he doesn't have the cap space to do it. And this is where I think it's fair to throw a little bit of shade Ken Holland's way. Well, of course, the caveat being half the league's in the same spot, right? So then you've got Bouchard, 33 games, 3 goals, 10 assists, 13 points. Last year in 81 games, 12 goals, 31 assists, 43 points. Bouchard's game has fallen off. Bouchard, last year I liked Bouchard quite a bit. This year, I don't know. It could be, sophomore jinx kind of material. It could be tough for a defenseman, sure. I do think he bounces back. He's still a very young defenseman, but it's been a tough year for him. Ryan, 32 games, 4 goals, 4 assists. Last year, 75 games, 10 goals, 12 assists. He is a 3rd/4th liner, and so his production isn't helping or hurting you either way. McLeod, 21 games, 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 points. Last year in 71 games, 9 goals, 12 assists, 21 points. I like McLeod. I think McLeod's a good forward. That being said, has he had a great year? No. But, again, there's been a lot of guys on the wing that haven't necessarily had the kind of year that was expected of them. One guy on the blue line that does seem to get a lot of love from fans and just in general is Brett Kulak. 33 games, 2 goals, 6 assists, 8 points. After being acquired by Edmonton last year in 18 games, he had 2 goals, 6 assists, 8 points. So the same amount of points as last year, but Kulak is a good two-way defenseman, good defensive instincts. But again, at 2.75, I don't have his cap hit up there because I haven't seen anybody arguing he's overpaid. But at 2.75, and this is a question that I think is rightfully asked of general managers. You pay $2.75 million to Kulak. Could you get a guy who would do the same thing he does, maybe for a lower cap hit? And I know that's a whole debate, and I'm not saying that because I think that he's overpaid or anything, but I do think that there are times where general managers will think, I can't lose this guy for nothing, and maybe end up signing him for money that might be better spent somewhere else. It's not throwing shade at the player to say it either. It's just a matter of saying, because of budgetary reasons, we're going to have to allow this one to go. I think it's the appearance of a guy going for nothing that may be troublesome for a general manager, which is why I think we see some guys signing contracts. I think that's why the Canucks signed JT Miller to the contract they did. Didn't want to lose him for nothing. Puljujarvi, $3 million cap hit for Puljujarvi in 33 games, 2 goals, 5 assists. Last year in 65 games, 14 goals, 22 assists, 36 points. Puljujarvi's kind of the worst case scenario right now, in that he's paid $3 million. You've got half the league not able to absorb that money. He's not playing at the top of his game. And the funny part is that while the article talked about the analytics crowd and how the analytics crowd is going to boo everything Holland does, the analytics crowd has mostly loved Puljujarvi and seen a lot of value in what Puljujarvi does from an advanced stats perspective. And basically with Puljujarvi, it looks like he's the kind of guy that in the right circumstance will flourish. So if he goes to a team where he's going to get put into a position to succeed, he will. And the idea being that maybe in Edmonton he doesn't get that opportunity. right? There will be Oiler fans who will say, I wish he got more, and there will be Oiler fans who say he's had too many. But either way, it's a tough situation because he wants out of Edmonton. They want to move him. This is a storyline that's gone on since before Ken Holland was hired. This is something that's gone on for years. The Puljujarvi situation never should have got here. And so, again, I don't need advanced stats to see that. I don't need to go to Money Puck. I don't need to go to Natural Stat Trick. Hey, free advertising for them, right? Never had anything to do with either of those sites. But it's something you don't need to do anything other than look at the numbers, just the regular, everyday hockey numbers, and say, Puljujarvi with 2 goals in 33 games, that's not enough for $3 million. And regardless of whose fault it is, it's a situation that needs to be resolved. Then you have Kyler Yamamoto, who's been hurt this year. 21 games, 2 goals, 5 assists, 7 points. That's a drop-off for him. Last year in 81 games, 20 goals, 21 assists, 41 points. So yes, we can look at the records last year and this year and say, hey, they're in about the same spot they were last year. But the individual players, we're seeing guys drop off that you really need not to drop off, especially when you don't have Evander Kane in the lineup. And so for Yamamoto, this was supposed to be a big year for him, and it really hasn't developed the way that I think he or the team would have wanted it to. Then you have Cody Ceci. Oiler fans generally love Cody Ceci. His cap hit is $3.25 million. It's an expensive blue line considering the amount of flack that it gets, right? 33 games, 1 goal, 5 assists. Offensively, he's dropped off last year in 78 games, 5 goals, 23 assists, 28 points. CC is a defenseman that I know I've talked about how I thought he had a bad game here and there. Oiler fans got mad at me for that last season. And so, yeah, this year, CC's numbers are off. And it again comes down to that question of, are the smartest GMs in the league the guys who look at that guy who wants $3.5 million and decides, I'm instead going to find somebody for $1 million or $1.5 million to try to do that same job? And it's not easy. And in a city like Edmonton, it's going to be really hard because you do have a lot of pressure. Now, I disagree with Mark Spector as well that there's this disconnect in Edmonton that is much wider between fans and the team than any other market in the National Hockey League. I would say that in Vancouver, it's really wide. I would say at times in Toronto it is. Montreal, it has been. Things have straightened out. Calgary, it has been too. And any Canadian market and Original Six markets have that issue as well. So Fogel's one that kind of stands out to me too. 22 games, 3 goals, 2 assists, 5 points. Last year, 82 games, 12 goals, 14 assists, 26 points. $2.75 million. Again, could you have somebody doing Fogel's job for less money? Probably, yeah. You could have somebody with 3 goals in 22 games. I love Fogel's game. You can love a player's game and not love their cap hit. And I think that's where we sometimes get tripped up. Is that for me to come out and say, I don't think, I don't think John Smith's not worth $5 million. Oh, see, Shannon's bad talking him. No, I might think John Smith's a great player, but I may not like the cap hit. And I think that's something that's been the situation in Edmonton a lot of the time. I don't think it's necessarily the players the fans don't like. I think it's been the cap hits. I think, as I said with Nurse, the no movement clause definitely doesn't help. Then you get into the other players. You've got Costin, who wasn't with the team last year. He has 2 goals, 2 assists in 17 games. I think Costin's been good. I think he is an NHL fourth liner at this point, and I'm glad to see him playing. Holloway, still some work to do with Holloway. There is a lot of upside there. 29 games, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points. He's had opportunities. The puck will eventually start going in, but Holloway is not a primary guy at this point, and I don't think the Oilers should view him as such. I don't think they have either. Janmark, 19 games, 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points. Janmark's offense has been waning for a while, and that's continued in Edmonton. But none of them have a contract that's necessarily problematic, so they're on the board. They didn't play for Edmonton last year either. Then you get into the goaltending, because the goaltending is always a conversation with Edmonton too. You got Skinner this year, 9-8-1, a 9.15 save percentage, 2.83 goals against average. I've said million so many times, I want to say $1 million. Goals against is not 2.83 million. That's I don't. How would you do that? Anyways, Skinner last year was 6-6 with a 9.13 save percentage, so he's nice and consistent there. Save percentage can fluctuate wildly with goaltenders. He's above average in both seasons, so that bodes well. But then you have Campbell, $5 million. It's a 4-year contract. There's Looking at cap friendly, there's no clause that says they can't trade it, other than the fact it's $5 million. Campbell 8-6-1, 876 is his points percentage. 876 is his save percentage, and 4.02 is his goals against average. So his goals against is 1.2 higher than Skinner's, and his save percentage is about 40 points below Skinner's. This is a big problem, right? And I like Jack Campbell, and most people do. But for Campbell, might be better suited as the backup rather than as the starter. Toronto last year was the first time he'd been a starter in the NHL. Of course, he got hurt. There's questions about his ability to go through the rigors of playing 50 or 55 games in a season. And now it's clear that he's not going to play that many for the Oilers. The signing of Jack Campbell was seen as a risk when the Oilers did it. And I understand why, because, you've got Koskinen's gone, Mike Smith's on LTIR, he won't play again. But then you look at other teams that go the cheaper route and realize, maybe that's the way to go. Carolina doesn't break the bank to pick up goaltenders. They will pick up guys who, might be backups. You look at the New York Islanders. They don't go out and, Varlamov signed for some money, sure, but they let Leonard go. And when they let Leonard go, there was a lot of questions about how do the Islanders let Leonard go after the season he just had. My guess is Lou Lamoriello looked at what Leonard was asking for and said no, and ends up being vindicated in hindsight. Last year, Koskinen 27-12-4, 903 save percentage. Smith 16-9-2 with a 915 save percentage. So Smith's numbers line up with Skinner's this year. Campbell's are below every other goaltender they had last year. Do I think Campbell can bounce back? Sure. Are there a few really bad games that skew the numbers? Absolutely. But it is something that needs to be figured out. It is not the same team as last year. The record is around the same as where it was last year. Would I be surprised if they went on a run? No. Would I be surprised if they're top 3 in the division at the end of the year? With the way the Pacific's been lately? Absolutely not. That wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. But they're going to need to do some work to get there. And for Holland, I do agree with something I did read, and I've seen this with a lot of GMs. They'd love to make a trade. They would absolutely love to make a trade. And they just can't. And at the same time, when you hear that from a general manager, and you hear, well, it's a flat cap and we just can't make a trade, the question should be asked of, so when you signed these contracts, didn't you know that you were putting yourself into this position? So when I see the general managers at the Board of Governors complaining that, well, nobody has any cap space, you did that to yourselves. If you lock yourself in a room and board it up so you can't get out, you can't complain that you can't get out of that room. You did it to yourself. So for GMs that get all snippy about it, I don't know. It's something I talked about where I did that video on budgeting not too long ago, where it's like, hey, are NHL GMs gonna learn to budget if the salary cap goes up? Because otherwise, they're just gonna keep spending to the max. We're gonna have this problem every year. And every year it'll be GMs shrugging their shoulders and going, we'd love to make a move. We can't. We don't have any cap space. With Ken Holland, he has decades of experience in Detroit. If there's a general manager that should, in his third year, or well, past the third year on the job, he was hired 3 years ago, so his fourth year on the job, have that space to make those moves, should be Ken Holland. He should have that ability to look ahead. He should have capologists in there as well and people who have those advanced stats. Like, for the general managers at this point who are still just kind of brushing off advanced stats, they won't do it publicly, of course. But if there's any left that do, I think they do it at their own peril. I've mentioned before, I think they're part of the picture. They're not the whole picture. But in Edmonton, you don't have to look at the advanced stats. I don't have any of them on the board. I'm just using regular numbers to show, yeah, the Oilers are not playing as well as they did last year. The record's still right around the same. That's fine. But the numbers say things aren't quite right in Edmonton. So we'll see how they work out, because tonight they're at Dallas. So if they win that one, that would help. Then on Friday, they're at home against Vancouver. That's a winnable game right there. I say that as a Canuck fan. Then on Tuesday, they're at Calgary. Friday, they're at Seattle. And the next night, they're at home against Winnipeg. So over the next 5 games, there's room there for those games against teams that they should and could beat. I'll throw Winnipeg in there because they're at home against Winnipeg. They should have no problem getting up for a game against Winnipeg. There should be a lot of hitting and a lot of dislike because they still should dislike each other from all the times they met each other a couple years back. And so I'm throwing that in there as a winnable game for them. So we'll see what happens. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Because I think the idea that, well, these analytic fans these days, they think they know better than the GM. Some of them do. Some of them think that. But in some cases, too, I think that we can't regard being a general manager as something that we don't necessarily understand when it comes to this stuff. There's a lot of other things that go into being a general manager. Yes, there's a lot more to it than just the contracts and the trades. Got it. But when it comes to cap space and management and looking at the overall big picture, fans are able to do that. And I don't think they're necessarily given enough credit for being able to figure some of this stuff out. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Just one of those things. I read that article yesterday and I thought, I have to do a video on that. I have to do a video on the Oilers because it just seemed really overly snippy to me. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.